Hello, I'm Louise Blain. I'm a journalist and a presenter, and I'm here for Dialect today. And I'm joined by Lucy Allen, part of the leadership team for Stand Against Violence. Now, what we're doing today is a little bit different for Dialect. It's on the 25th of November. It's the International Elimination of Violence Against Women Day. Now, this is something that Dialect really wants to recognise, talking about this shadow pandemic that is occurring. And I think for the most important thing, we have to kind of introduce this. And before I get onto our conversation, Lucy, and we're going to go really far and just talk about a lot of things around this topic, I think it's really important that we actually kind of define what this is. So I've actually taken a look at the UN website, and the UN website talks about why we must eliminate violence against women. Now, the list of what this includes is vast. We can start with intimate partner violence, we can talk about sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, FGM, child marriage. Now, all of these things come under this, but I think it's really important to say that this includes many people. So I think the UN say, while gender-based violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, some women and girls are particularly vulnerable. For instance, young girls and older women, women who identify as lesbian, bisexual, transgender or intersex, migrants and refugees, indigenous women and ethnic minorities, or women and girls living with HIV and disabilities, and those living through humanitarian crisis. Now, this is a lot to talk about. This is a huge topic. But Lucy, I think what we'll talk about to start with, before we get on to what we can do and what we can discuss, is who you are, what you work towards, and just a little bit about you, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for having me on today with you. So Stand Against Violence is a charity that was started about 15 years ago by a chap called Adam. Adam tragically lost his brother. His brother was murdered on the way home from a party, quite randomly by some other guys who'd had a heavy night in the pub and picked a fight, and tragically Adam's brother Lloyd was murdered. And Adam set the charity up back then really to go into schools and educate children and young people around the dangers associated with picking up that offensive weapon, how much harm you can do, and what you can do to keep yourself safe, and what you can do to make sure that your friends aren't behaving like an idiot as well. So we do a lot of work in schools. We use education as a tool to drive violence reduction. So we have a range of different courses that will cover all age ranges from 5 till 18, talking around a variety of different subjects. So yes, knife crime, violent crime, but we'll also start to talk about domestic abuse. We'll start to talk about bullying. We'll start to talk about toxic masculinity. And what's really important for us as well is that we recognise that violence comes in many different forms. And I know you've touched on that there. It's not as simple as Lloyd's tragic story, where somebody picked up a weapon and hit Lloyd, and tragically he was murdered. We know that financial violence is a huge problem inside domestic abuse. We know that gaslighting is a huge problem and can cause massive problems for the women that are subjected to it. So it's very important for us as a charity to recognise that violence comes in many different forms, and to be teaching our children and our young people what they can do to keep themselves safe, to keep their friends and their families safe as well. We're also very fortunate in that we work with a lot of the Premiership football clubs. They have a program called Premiership Kicks that we work alongside. We go in and we talk not just to their youth academies, but to their players, to their staff as well. And increasingly as well, we're talking to women in universities as well. And we have some personal protection courses that we take into universities. We've been doing a lot around Freshers Week specifically, around how to teach women not to defend themselves, because this isn't self-defense. This is about understanding the situation that you're in, and being aware of what's going on around you. So being aware of what can happen to you with drink spiking, being aware of what can happen to you in the situations that we all find ourselves in, but just how to read the space, I guess. So yes, like I say, vast majority of courses that we offer, but they're all around educating, and they're around attitudinal change, they're around groupthink, they're around the psychology of violence, and trying to get children and young people to collectively agree to find ways of conflict resolution that don't involve violence.
I think that's really interesting that we're talking about education, because I think a lot of the time we can think of violence against women being just one tiny thing. I mean, even looking at something like the UN stats, 1 in 3 women and girls experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, most frequently by an intimate partner. Now, while a lot of what we watch in the press, a lot of what we see in the media, we saw the tragic case of Sarah Everard, made a real sort of awareness come around walking home at night and all these things. But actually, that is in the minority, and the majority is violence at the home with people you know and people you're in a relationship with. So, I mean, in terms of if people were looking for help, you're obviously not the only agency. You work with multiple other support networks as well, right?
We do. We have good relations. I think the worst thing that we can do is to go in, and specifically when we're talking around subjects like domestic abuse and domestic violence, it could be that a lot of the children that we're talking to are living in homes where that is very prevalent. So it's very important for us not to just go in to deliver our message and then leave. We will work in a multi-agency approach. We'll be working with Women's Aid. We'll be working with other organisations specifically who'll be involved potentially in around suicide prevention, around bullying, to give children an idea of the other agencies that they can go and talk to, whether it be confidentially, whether it be on a helpline, just to talk through maybe some things that we've triggered through our education and our training, and to find those solutions. What we're not there to do is drop a bomb and then walk away. And I think that's really critical. And I think what's also really critical, and I think when we're talking about the cessation of violence against women, is not to make this, not to victim shame, not to make the women the victim, not to make women scared, but also not to tar all men with the same brush. And we know that, we've just had the recent Office of National Statistics report on violence against women. In the year 2020, there were, tragically 207 women lost their lives, but it was 207 women, and only 13% of that 207 women were killed by strangers. So we are talking about very, very small numbers. And I think what we mustn't do is when we talk about these things, we mustn't alienate the young men we're talking to. We have to, as I said, do that group think, do that re-education, talk to them very clearly about entitlement, about toxic masculinity, but give them the tools to challenge their friends, give them the tools to challenge the men in their families, give them the tools to recognize behavior when they see it, and to challenge, to call it out. And you can only do that if you're taking all of those boys and young men with you on that journey. So yes, we are very clear. I think we are potentially at a little bit of a segue moment. I think there's Ofsted have said that very soon it's going to be curriculum mandated that violence against women is spoken about in schools, which is fantastic, but the very clear message is women are victims and men are the perpetrators. And I think for me that is dangerous, and as I say, we need this is collective. We can't ghettoize the problem with women. We can't expect women to solve this ourselves. We need the men to be our allies and to stand with us as well.
I think you used the word toxicity, which I find is that's bandied around a lot as a term. We talk about toxic masculinity, we talk about a toxic culture. Something we'll talk a little bit later on is a lot of toxicity in online spaces, especially around women. Do you find toxicity a kind of a helpful term, or does it feel like a bit of a hindrance when there's all this there's a lot of nuance?
Yeah, I think people don't really understand it. I think that's the thing. And I think Police Scotland made a remarkable video that if you search Google for "Don't Be That Guy," and it's a remarkably powerful video which talks about toxic masculinity, how it starts and how it ends, and how the smallest piece of banter can actually escalate into something very, very serious. And I think that term toxic masculinity, I think it's a good catch-all term. It allows us to recognize types of behavior, but there are so many, as you say, so many nuances in there, and for every man, for every kind of woman that behavior is aimed at, there are going to be different triggers, there are going to be different levels of tolerance as well, and what can seem a very harmless piece of banter to a group of male friends can be extremely triggering for a woman that's gone through a bad experience in the past. So while I welcome that people are talking about this now, and that we are recognizing a type of behavior through giving it that label of toxic masculinity, I think we need to be very careful, and we need to also examine what that is made of, and that very small things that we might not necessarily think fall under that banner can be very triggering for some people.
I think as well, you're talking about going into schools and speaking to young men and speaking to them in ways, that is not, it doesn't put them off. What kind of form does that sort of education take?
So I think the worst thing that you can do is to go into school and give them a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
And
For all of us.
For all of us, it's just incredibly dull, and you can see kids turning off straight away. So everything that we do is around role playing. It's around group discussion. It's about group agreement. So we'll be giving examples. We'll be asking our children and our young people whether they think this is right, wrong, or grey. So there's a lot of that. Where on the spectrum do you see this behaviour? And it's about getting everybody to recognise that all behaviours are on a spectrum, but collectively we need to move in this right direction. So like I say, it's about groupthink, it's about group agreement, and where we find our training is most powerful is if we go into a school, we're working with every single year group in the school, we are educating everybody, we are resetting the expectations of levels of behaviour, then that's when it becomes very easy for people to start calling out bad behaviour when they see it. And again, I think for us that's the most critical thing when we're talking to those young men, is giving them a pattern, giving them a blueprint, if you like, for what they can do and what they should do if they see that kind of behaviour being exhibited by their peers, by their cohorts.
And I suppose as well, what happens then is we have such a rich online world as well as our real world, and that's where a lot of people can hide behind screens and smartphones, and we then sort of, that toxicity kind of takes itself online. Do you think that the education at the real life level can be taken online, and that's where that kind of attitude will change?
I really hope so. But we do really struggle with this as a charity, as a society. We really struggle with the change in people's behaviour from real world in a classroom to what they then go and do in WhatsApp, on TikTok, or whatever their kind of chosen means of communication is. And we see it specifically with a lot of bullying as well. And I think that it's really important for us to do as much as we can to lay the groundwork in schools on that kind of one-to-many education front, but we also need to talk to parents as well. And I think what, for me, the most important thing that we can do with our young people is to give them, as I say, to give them this blueprint for behaviour in the future. But we also means that we need to work with our parents, right? And what we can't do is we can't push them back into environments where they're seeing a lot of this behaviour, they're seeing a lot of this toxicity, and expect what we've said to them in a day in a classroom to really change their mindset for good. So yes, I think it is important that we are also making ourselves available to parents, making ourselves available, giving the parents the resources that they need as well, and try to encourage, and again on a multi-agency approach, trying to encourage a kind of cradle to grave attitude. We've started to work. We've got a pilot running in a few of the prisons in the UK, where we're talking to prisoners coming out of reform, and we're also talking with the young offenders teams as well, and also for those that don't know a great deal about the education system in the UK, there are these things called pupil referral units where kids will end up if they've been permanently excluded from schools. So again, we're working with those really hardest to reach children to try and work that cradle to grave approach of violence reduction. But yes, it is a struggle, and it absolutely, a lot of the toxic behavior we see online, it's because it's being fed by people who are incredibly frustrated, who for whatever reason their lives are hard, and it's a relatively easy way to let off steam, to have a shout, and not really understanding the damage that it does, and the fact that damage follows you into your home as well. And I think that's what is so harmful about that kind of online abuse, is you can't escape it. You turn on your phone, it's there. And for us, it is a critical part of what we teach children about, but it's the hardest piece to manage.
I think talking about it being hard and being, people find it online and you just see sort of outbursts. I think we see a lot of outbursts online and in responses that are aggressive and nasty. But I suppose things are, my best way to put it, when things are, this is difficult, and I think you and I have we actually talked about it before we chatted here, is we talked about the fact that some of us live in a bit of a bubble. and we think that the men in our lives, everyone's got the right idea, and everything's changed and everything's updated. No one thinks like that anymore. But actually, a lot of our ideas, that if we aren't seeing this on a day-to-day basis, these are stark statistics. Of these are huge numbers of women, but we don't see it. Do you think it's really important for people to kind of break out of that bubble that a lot of us seem to sort of exist in, so that this can be addressed?
No, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand that we are very lucky in the situation that we find ourselves in. We are very lucky that we have friends, husbands, partners who are our allies. But there are lots of women out there that simply don't have that. And I think that's why for us it's really important. When we the schools that we go into some schools from very challenging backgrounds with a lot of socioeconomic problems, and that's where as a charity our emphasis needs to be, and it's that recognition that life is bloody tough. It is really hard out there, and that I'm a massive believer in education anyway. I just I think if I ever got into government, pouring money into education for me would be absolutely the best thing to do to solve so many of this country's issues and problems. But I think going back to what we're talking about today, we need to assume nothing when we're going into the schools that we're going into. We need to assume that we are doing that education exercise from a kind of a ground zero basis, and not to have some of the preconceptions that we have in our very privileged lives that we lead.
And I suppose also, in a sort of flip side of that, is that we then expect all the people that we know to be in perfect Instagram happy relationships, when actually lots of people are suffering. We talk about the UN talked about this as a shadow pandemic. This has increased, especially domestic violence at home. It's increased 5-fold over the COVID pandemic, because people are at home more. So these are actually things that could be happening day to day, and we have no idea. We see everyone skipping along in nice cars and doing all these things, and what happens behind closed doors is potentially also what we need to think about and understand that too, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly from the ONS figures that we saw recently, 92% of violent attacks against women are by people that are intimately known to them. So 92%. It's a massive number, and I think it shows the vulnerability of women in relationships. It shows the vulnerability of women in family settings, and let's also remember that's just the physical violence. We're not talking about the gaslighting. We're not talking about the financial abuse as well that so many women in particular are suffering from in relationships. It's as you say, it's been fueled a great deal as well by COVID, by us all being kind of shut up, and a lot of the economic issues that have happened around COVID, and it is, as you say, a shadow pandemic, and something that as a charity we're being asked for more and more is to go in and talk to children and young people about domestic abuse, because I think for me what is so important is you can't establish that as normality. If you have a family where domestic abuse is rife, then boys learn from their fathers how to be men. And if that's what they're seeing, then that's how they will grow. And I think it's often so difficult for the women in that situation to challenge the behaviour. It's almost impossible in the majority of cases. So there have to be agencies like us and Women's Aid and some of the wonderful other organisations that we work with, who are kind of chipping away from the outside, trying to, as I say, kind of reset that normal button. But yes, the COVID pandemic has been a massive problem. It has fueled domestic abuse, and we see it coming through in the numbers from the ONS. Violence against women is growing, not deaths, because actually deaths did fall, but violence against women has risen, and it is perpetrated in the vast majority by people known to that woman.
I think we obviously, Dialect, who we're here today for, work a lot in the tech space and the gaming space, and I know it's very different from the kind of what we've been talking about before, but I think there's been a lot of what we've seen increased over COVID is we've seen the increase of scams. Now, what you're talking about with financial abuse, the rise in romance scams, who primarily prey on women online, who on Instagram people appear and start asking for They ask for money, they ask for gift cards, and a lot of us, I mean, I work in the tech space, and I've been on a couple of radio shows where people are saying, oh, these scams, it's just ridiculous, how could people fall for them? But I think it's absurd to think that, because what we use the internet for is connection, right? Don't we? We all want to have our friends there, and that's where we date, and we feel lonely, so we go to our phones. And there's been a real, and I don't know what you think about the real increase in people losing hundreds of thousands of pounds and dollars. And that's just another way that, and it's not, it is primarily women who are targeted here. And that's, it's another horrible element to looking for some kind of emotional connection there.
It is, and I think, again, coming back to the COVID point, we have all been shut up, we've all been isolated. Even in the kind of the bosom of your family, you can still feel incredibly lonely. And some of these scammers are incredibly sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
They are able to, and I've seen some of the same horror stories that you've seen, women losing their houses, losing hundreds of thousands of pounds to these scammers, and it is heartbreaking. And as you say, I don't think it's we're not understanding the problem if we go, well, why were you stupid enough to fall for that? They
Exactly.
are arch emotional manipulators. And again, it's something that women are being targeted, and women on their own are being targeted, and women of also of a certain age as well are being targeted. I see a lot. So lonely middle-aged women who potentially have had relationships fall apart are being targeted by these horrific scams. So yes, I think it all comes back. It's all wrapping up with some of the societal changes that have happened with COVID, which have been really hard on women. I know it's not well, it is connected to violence against women because it is absolutely down to our economic reliance on men. But the amount of women that lost their jobs during COVID compared to the amount of men that lost their jobs, women were really badly hit. Women went back into the home and did a huge amount of childcare. And I think in terms of the feminist agenda, in terms of making sure that we're driving towards equality, COVID has done huge amounts of damage. It really, really has. And all of these things that we're talking about, domestic abuse, scamming, emotional manipulation as well, they really have been fueled by COVID and women going back into the home.
Which is, when we actually think about it, feels completely wrong, doesn't it? Because the idea that working from home would actually mean that potentially people should be able to do that dream thing that people say we can't do, which is have everything. But if you are working from home and you have childcare and you've got multiple things that you have to do at home, you can also still work. So in theory,
yes,
it should be pushing that forward, because that's actually something else I wanted to say as well, is about literally the tech sector and jobs and women there as well, because it's something that we expect being able to work from home as being a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth remembering, and this is very specific to the UK, but also specific to a lot of developing nations as well, women aren't doing those high-tech jobs.
Yep.
Women are the supermarket stackers, women are the waitresses, women are working in the service economy. So that is predominantly why they have been so badly hit, is because they're not in the main doing those jobs. We were joking about it the other day and saying, okay, where do all the middle-aged women go? You get to midlife, where are the leaders? And so many women exit our industries because of the demands that are being put on them through family, through childcare of their parents, their children, and you do see this exodus. But in terms of the tech sector, yes, there's still, and we know from our own experience with the games industry, there's still a vacuum at the top of our industry, with female leaders. They're not there, and I think that's something that really needs to be challenged. And I know something that we've spoken about before is, if tech isn't being designed by women, then it's not serving women. And I think there's so many cases, even the classic example that's rolled out again and again around seatbelts, and seatbelts only being designed for men, so they cut into our neck, and they if we're in a crash, they're really damaging, so we have to change the way the seatbelts are aligned, and starting from there on in, to the fact that most of our digital assistants now have female voices. It's again and again and again, and even the design of technology, and mice that don't fit female hands, headsets. I mean, luckily this headset was designed for a woman, but so many headsets that we wear that are so heavy, because they're designed for a man to wear. And I think tech needs to be much more representative. And I know you gave a figure earlier, didn't you, about the number of women who are now involved in games design, which seemed a lot healthier. I can't remember what that statistic was.
Yeah, so it's 24% of game developers are women, which actually seemed very healthy and surprising because it's something that, the game development space is so male dominated, despite the fact that the gaming space itself is 50-50. It's completely split. There are thankfully and happily just as many women exploring games and tech as men. But I think it's interesting what you're saying about that as well, because it's not just tech that's designed, it's also stories, isn't it? It's the narratives that we have, it's the films that we watch, it's the games that we play, and those vitally also need to have, they need to empower women too. They need to not breed toxicity. They need to be healthy role models for the kids that you're also educating. They need to, that's where the root of so much of our, I suppose so many of our ideals and our morals come from the media that we consume. So that's why it's vitally important that when we play a game, it's been as written by as many people as possible to make sure that those stories are balanced.
Absolutely, and I think when we're talking about influences that are there informing our children, informing decisions that they're making, it is so vitally important for the games developers to step up. And it's about more than having positive female role models. It's about, exactly as you were saying, it's about removing the male entitlement and the toxicity from the storylines themselves, from the environments themselves, from the worlds that we're building through the games that we're playing. We need to make sure that there is absolute equality within those. And I know that there are some dreadful examples from games that were developed in the past where women are the bystanders if they're lucky, and are often subject to horrific violence throughout the gameplay. That has in the main stopped, and that is a great thing to see, although we all know there are outlying examples where that still is the case. But it's about okay, we've solved that problem, let's move on to the next bit. Let's start building worlds where there is absolute equality, not just strong female role models, but the children are learning through the gameplay that that women have a equally strong part to play, both in those real worlds, but also in the kind of the real life as well.
I think that is really important to say, because there are obviously horrific examples from the past, but I think over the last even 3 or 4 years, as short as that, we've seen real change and diversity. And there was one of the biggest games of last year was The Last of Us Part 2, where you played as a woman, not just a woman, you played as a gay woman, and that to me was vitally important. That was a pivotal part of that. Was just one of the biggest, most emotionally mature, most incredible stories of last year. That just it's suddenly like beautiful representation of relationships in all their forms. And I think a lot of games now you can choose your pronouns, which is really important. That feels like that might feel like something that people would be, I'd never understand why people are so angry, but people go, oh, why is it doing this? It's just trying to be woke. And it's like, no, it's just trying to include as many people as possible. And imagine being able to say, oh, this is who I am, and I can set my setting as who I am, and I can make my hair look like me, and I can make my body look like me. And that shouldn't ever be an issue. That should just be standard and a given. And I think that's the direction we're going in. But at the same time, again, this is only a small part of what we're talking about today to influence far bigger issues and far more serious issues than outside of the games industry.
But increasingly, it's a really important part. 5-10 years ago, we'd have been talking about the representation of women in films, in music videos, in TV. Now, games is such a massive part of somebody's kind of entertainment world that it's really important that we have these conversations. It's probably more impactful because of the incredible realism of the games that we're now playing and your involvement with it. You are absolutely submerged into this gameplay, and that's why I think potentially it's even more important than the conversations we were having around representation on screen, because you are so intimately connected with the gameplay, and also the rise in the number of hours that we're spending playing games, and the rise in the amount of women playing games as well. And I think also that has moved the needle a great deal. Games developers understanding that women are half their audience now, so they've got to get it right, and that's incredibly refreshing. As you say, I think the industry's done a really great job in the last 3-4 years of cleaning up their act, of getting it right. I think we need to kind of move to the next level now.
Yeah.
And for me, and I think it was really interesting what you were saying about, picking your pronouns, and the criticism about being somehow woke. It's not. It's about respect, and it's about tolerance, and everything that we do as a charity, everything that we should do as a society, is about encouraging exactly that, encouraging respect, encouraging inclusion, encouraging tolerance of each other, and so much of that is where you see that violent behaviour being bred, and whatever we can do as a society through the entertainment that we are commissioning, through the games we are playing, through the TV that we're watching, we need to reward the people that are doing that. We need to tune in, we need to buy their games, because again, those market forces as well will encourage that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And also, there was someone said that inclusivity isn't pie. Once you've divided it up and given it out, it's not gone. To be inclusive, it's not invisible. Like, it is infinite pie. It's not like that, Inclusivity doesn't run out. Nobody gets less of it because everyone has it. It is a beautiful whole where everyone should be able to be the same. So I think inclusivity is key that way. But I think we'll start wrapping up now. But is there anything in particular that you are working on that you'd like to draw attention to?
I think there is so much. I think what I would really encourage, if you have a child that you're worried about, if you are working in a school where there's a problem, I think that what I would like to just highlight is the different routes that are available to you as a parent, as a teacher, as an educator, that you can start to follow. So I think we have a lot of resources. Our website is standagainstviolence.co.uk, so you can hop onto our website, have a look there. But there are also lots of other routes as well. I think there's always a safeguarding member of staff in the school that your child will be attending if you have a problem with the children that you're caring for. So you can always talk to your safeguarding officer in the school. If this is a broader problem with the area that you're living in, then the government is supporting an initiative called the Violence Reduction Units. They're very often run inside the police, but as an independent force within the police. It's a really good place to start. The VRUs are doing some fantastic work around knife amnesties, gun amnesties, are working very closely with people around county lines and modern slavery as well. So they're a great place to start. And again, you can just Google your local VRU and get in contact with somebody that's going to be able to help you there as well. And they commission us to go in where we're hotspots. They'll commission us to go in and start to do some early intervention work. But there are always places that you can go for help. And the list is endless. If domestic violence is something that you are being subjected to, or that you're worried that somebody that is being subjected to, then Women's Aid is a phenomenal organisation, and I would really encourage you to get in contact. You're going to have your local refuges as well, that you can get in touch with, who will be able to help, and it's all confidential. And I think one of the things that I find again and again and again is that women are too scared to come forward. Women are worried about reporting. They're worried about being troublemakers, and I hear that time and time again. I didn't want to cause trouble. You're not a troublemaker. You need to report this bad behavior, because if a man is behaving badly towards you, he's sure as hell not going to stop at you. There's going to be his next partner. There's going to be somebody else in his family, one of his friends. So it's important that we're dealing with that as well. And also I think from what can men do, because we get asked this a lot, what can men do? I think it's really important that men recognize toxic masculinity and entitlement when they see it, and they are not scared to call out their friends. And it is hard. We appreciate that it is really, really difficult if your mates are having a bit of banter to kind of nudge in and say, you don't do that. But like I said at the start, we as women can't solve this on our own. We need men as our allies, and this needs to be full-scale societal change rather than women just kind of beating our drum and saying, listen to us. So for men, yes, just find that intervention where you can, call your mates out, because if you're not challenging it, then you're a part of it. And that's, I think, the message that I'd like to get across to the men out there that are listening.
Perfect. And what we'll do is we'll get all of the links to what you were talking about there in the below, and we'll get Dialect. We'll put out all the information on that as well, so you will always have information there. But thank you so much, Lucy. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It was a pleasure. Always is.